Hey, what's up guys? It's Seb from Workbench, and this week we're going to take a look at creating a stamp effect in Cinema 4D.
This week we're going to explore how to use the collision deformer to create an effect similar to this one. There are also a few other things that I discovered that collision deformer can be used for that are really pretty interesting. So let's get started and take a look. Today I'm going to start with a blank scene. I'm going to create a plane and a cube, and then I'm going to go into the deformers tab here and I'm going to get a collision deformer. I'm going to make the collision deformer a child of the plane, and then in the collision deformer I'm going to go to colliders and I'm going to drop this cube in here. Now there's several settings in here for the solver. There's inside stretch, outside volume, and intersect. By default it starts at intersect, and this is what intersect does. You can see it stretches it a little bit, and once it gets past the 50% point it snaps to the other end. Let me show you the other ones. I'm going to lock this here and I'm going to go to the next one down, which will be inside. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move this. You can see inside behaves almost the same, except for it doesn't do the back side. It just gets to a certain point and then lets go. Then I'm going to switch to inside stretch. See, that one just never lets go. And then it keeps these corners pinned. We'll come back to this one. Outside, which essentially is almost the same thing as intersect, except for it uses the opposite side of the polygon normals. And then this one again, like inside, once it gets to a certain point, it just pops to the other side. And there's outside volume, which in this case doesn't do anything. For our purposes, we're going to use inside stretch. That one gives you the nicest feel for what I'm trying to do. So there's some other controls in here. Under object, you have fall off, which is kind of cool because you can go to surface here and you can create a curve so you can affect the shape of how the deformer is acting on the surface. You can change the distance from the surface. So when you set this to 0 distance, it essentially pins it to the edge of the object. So if I turn this off, you can see the cube is there. And if I pulled it up, you can see you start to get outside the object and it tries to round it to this shape. So for example, if I change this shape like this, you get a much more flowing surface. This will become more evident when we actually start to use text. Then you obviously have the collider tab, which we're just messing with, which is where you would put an object that's colliding with the surface. You have an include tab, which we're not going to use. You have a maps tab. If you had, for example, a vertex map, you could control how much stretch a certain area has. You have a cache tab, which I'll explain a little later since we're going to use it a little later. And then in this advanced tab, it's really kind of useful because I discovered that you can change how this actually is behaving. So for example, you can change your stiffness, you can change your structure, you can change how much flex it has. In here you can change your size, so you won't notice it too much. The amount of stretch. You see the edges can either be pinned completely down or they can pull up, and you can change your relax. So really quickly you can these settings and end up with something almost like a piece of cloth. And then you could throw a subdivision surface on it and end up with like a nice clean piece of cloth without actually having to use a cloth engine or figuring out how to do it. You can see how nice that looks. So this is the simple example. All right, let's take a look at something a little more interesting. I'll do the same thing. I'm going to create a plane. And this time I'm going to use a motext object. So this is going to be our object we're going to use to deform. Like we did before, I'm going to create a collision surface, drop that in there. Then in colliders, I'm going to drop in my motext, and I'm going to change the collision type, or the solver type I should say, to inside stretch. So now if I pull this up, you can see we're deforming the surface. Unfortunately for this example, we're going to have to increase our subdivisions on our plane to be able to show the text through it. So I'm going to make this plane a little smaller, and then I'm going to increase the subdivisions on the width somewhere about 300. If I hide this motext object, you can already see you're giving us a much smoother look, but you still can't discern what it says because we don't have any subdivisions in the Z. So I'm going to increase that as well. I'm going to go to 100, and there you go. And I'm going to keep it at that setup for speed's sake, but you can certainly crank it up. We don't need to have this extrude quite as much, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit too. Something like that will work. Now the other thing that I did was I went into my object and I changed the fall off. I set it to distance. Now you could definitely play with the settings, but these are the settings that work good for me. I set distance to 132. I set strength to 100, and I set restore shape to 54%. And this is what my curve looks like. End of the curve has to do with the plane, and this end of the curve has to do with the top of the collision. So then the next thing I did was I animated this. Now that's not super straightforward. It is a motex, so you can use effectors, like the plane effector, for example. However, which we had to rotate, so if I do this, I have to set this to effector. Now you can already notice that it's stopped working. I'm not 100% sure why it stopped working, but the way I got around doing that was once I'd set up my animation, I went into the collision deformer and I enabled cache and had it calculate the cache. So you can set this to animate, have the text pop into the thing and stamp it out. Of course, if you wanted to do it all in one shot, you could just with regular animation, but I wanted it to put one letter in at a time. So let me show you how I did that. For this example, I'm going to use a plane effector with a spherical field. And if you wanted to do the same thing in R18 and R19, you would use a spherical fall off. In the remapping, I'm inverting it so that it starts from the middle and works its way out. You can see it animates from the center out. So now I'm going to go in the collision tag and I'm going to calculate a cache. And when it's done, you can play the animation back real time or relatively real time depending on your system. But you can see it's stamping from the center and working its way out. Now let's say that I wanted to alter it slightly a bit more. So I'm just going to look at the motex now. You can see how the animation starts from the center and works its way out. So I wanted it to have a little more impact. So I went into the field, I adjusted my remap, I turned off clamp, set the minimum to -94 and set the maximum to 434. So you get a thing like this. So it's much more sharp. So you see the animation has more impactfulness. And I'm going to go back into this and recache it. I'm going to do calculate again. And when it's done, it's much more impactful. And then as a final step, you can take your plane and stick it in a subdivision surface just to give you a little bit cleaner molded look. Of course, before that, I would probably go in and add more subdivisions to the actual plane so that this will be a little bit cleaner. Let me show you how that looks. So if I went into this plane, I probably would go 300, and then of course you have to recache it. But you can see already how much cleaner this looks. And you definitely will have to play with the settings a bit until you get to something that you like. One thing you could do is change the shape of your motext. So in the cap settings, change it to a different cap setting or add more rounding. That'll definitely change the look of the stamp. So that's about it for this technique. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you have any comments or questions, leave in the comments down below. If you'd like to help support what we do, go to patreon.com/workbench and check out the blog and the store at workbench.tv. As always, I'm Sev. We will catch you next week.